I'm Jeff Crane, President of the Congressional Sportsmen's Foundation, and along with the Safari Club International, who are our co-hosts this morning for this breakfast, I want to welcome everybody. This topic is one that the House seems to kind of get a handle on. We've had a little problem in the Senate, but as hunters, we always remain hopeful and persistent that this is going to be our year, because we have decided collectively that we're going to package a bunch of individual bills into a Sportsman's Act. And rather than me talk about those bills and the act, I think I will invite some of the members that are here today to talk about their provisions, and more importantly, talk about the prospects and what we're thinking we can do to get it out of the House and get it out of the Senate, because obviously that's the objective. This is a great bill on both sides of the aisle and on both sides of the Capitol. We just need to get some momentum. For most of you that know, we work with the largest bipartisan caucus on Capitol Hill, the Congressional Sportsmen's Caucus, and it's a fantastic opportunity for all of us as sportsmen and women to be able to have these folks lined up as our friends, because they truly are. And I don't think that anybody that cares about hunting, fishing, and the great outdoors ever asks a guy in a duck blinder on your boat, you know, what are you voting on? You know, what party did you come from? I think it's more about the friendship and the fellowship and conservation of our great outdoors. So I have a couple of our co-chairs from the House here today. On the Republican side, from Virginia, we got Rob Whitman, and standing in right now for our co-chair, our vice chair from Texas, Gene Green. Gentlemen, could you just come on up? All right.
Well, good morning, folks. Thanks so much for coming out. It's a great opportunity to share some information about these comprehensive sportsmen's packages that are both in the House and the Senate. Very important bills. As you know, we try to coordinate to make sure we get as much into those bills as we can. There's the Bipartisan Sportsmen's Act that's over there on the Senate side, and the Sportsmen's Heritage and Recreational Enhancement Act of 2015, better known as the SHARE Act, here on the House side. We have a number of members today that will share the specifics of their bills. There are a lot of different bills in there. We try to cobble together as wide a variety of interests as we can to get as much done in these sportsmen's packages as possible. So there will be some things there where people will ask questions about or may have some concerns about, but we have done an exhaustive search to make sure we've included everything that is applicable to getting what we believe is a good sportsman's package done. So we appreciate you coming out today to learn more about that, learn what you can do to help us through the process to make sure that we're connecting with members, to make sure that their questions get answered. We really need to make sure we get as much support as possible on these bills, because they're good bills, and the legislation contained within them is very good legislation that needs to pass. So thanks again for coming out this morning. I'm going to introduce one of our co-chairs of the Sportsmen's Caucus, Gene Green. Gene?
Thank you, Rob. Thank you. Those of you, I know we have some members in the audience you'll be announcing in a couple of minutes, but the first thing is that the House had late votes last night to about 11:45, and we found out that you shouldn't drink whiskey and smoke cigars and then vote late to get early attendance and make breakfast. I want to thank y'all for being here. We're kicking off our third Congressional Sportsman's Briefing, and I'm excited to be part of the leadership. The four of us work together very good. We get along very well, and those of you know, I went on my first hunting trip in the 1970s, and it was with my father-in-law. My dad didn't hunt or fish, but my father-in-law, and I fell in love with his daughter, but I don't know if he had not taught me to hunt and fish. I don't know, although now we've been married 45 years. So, but it's the work we do in the caucus is bipartisan and nonpartisan. If you look at the list on the chair, we have a lot of really great sportsman and outdoor pieces of legislation that we want to package together into the SHARE Act. And the goal is to get it out of the House and the Senate and to get it signed into law. Because any one of these things, I think, would help a certain segment of our industry and our sportsmen's groups. But coming together, it's such a great package that all of us can support it. And that's what our goal is in this Congress, to get something to the President's desk that he will sign. So again, thank you, and appreciate everyone being here, and particularly for our sponsors, Sportsmen Clubs International.
Thank you, gentlemen. I'm going to recognize a few members of Congress, and I know some of them are going to come up here momentarily. We've got Congressman Graves, Congressman Hardy, Congressman Gibbs, Congressman Latta, Congressman McClintock, Congressman Newhouse. Thank you all for being here. Let's give them a round of applause because they are our leaders. My good friend from Oklahoma is here, Bill Brewster, one of the founders of the Congressional Sportsmen's Caucus. Bill, as always, thank you for being here as well. Before I invite the individual members here, I got the privilege of testifying in front of Congressman McClintock's subcommittee from Natural Resources, and I thought he did a great job, and I didn't know whether he kind of looking, it's weird looking up here, like they said, with the whiskey and cigars, it's kind of looking, a room looks a little weird right now. There, yeah, Congressman, I thought maybe if you could lead us off here with something just to say about the Sportsman's Act and what you're thinking the prospects are in the House, that would be a good start. And so I'll turn the floor over to you for a minute. Congressman McClintock.
Well, I think the prospects are good, but as Bill Guevara once warned, the predictions are very difficult, especially when they involve the future. I think the prospects are very good in the House. The Senate obviously is engineered to work differently for some very good reasons. I can't predict what the prospects are going to be if it reaches the White House this year, but I do think that the climate is dramatically improving for this and a lot of the reform legislation that is so desperately needed. On the Federal Lands Committee, we're seeking 3 overarching public policy goals. First, to restore public access to the public lands. These are not the king's forests where the common people are to be herded off. Quite the contrary, these are the forests belonging to the American people. They have every right to full public access of them. Our responsibility to preserve these lands for future generations doesn't mean closing these lands to the current generation. So that is our first objective. The second is to restore sound forest management practices to our public lands. For 35 years now, our federal lands have been consigned to a policy that can only be described as benign neglect. The environmental left has had their way with these policies for the past 35 years. They have dominated our litigation, our law, our public policy, our courts, our administrative officials, and the result is, after 35 years, not only have these policies devastated our economy, they have done enormous damage to the environment as well. As one forester told me years ago, all that excess timber comes out of the forest one way or another. It's either carried out or it's burned out, but it comes out. When we carried it out, we had a thriving economy and much healthier forests. Today we see the results. It is high time in the environment as well as the economy that we restore sound land management principles. And by the way, the SHARE Act fits in very importantly with that objective in terms of wildlife management. And finally, we seek to restore the federal government as a good neighbor to the local communities that are directly impacted by the ownership of the public lands. I represent the Sierra Nevada. In California, I have counties such as Alpine where 93% of the land area is owned by the federal government. And you ask anybody out there, it has not been a good neighbor. We're going to restore the federal government as a partner with these local communities, not as a landmaster. So those are our 3 objectives. The SHARE Act is the first bill that we heard in the subcommittee. We've since heard a major forest reform bill. There is much, much more to come. And as far as the immediate future, again, very difficult to see. I think the long-term prospects for this and other legislation has never been better. So thank you all very much for everything that you're doing to bring us to that day.
I invite everybody, it's on your chair here, just to take a look at this and see how many yeses are in both the House and the Senate versions of things. Yeah, the column goes down, but the critical mass on this thing says yes, yes, yes. I like the words yes, yes, yes. And when it comes to the prospects of this thing, I'm going to start with our past co-chair in the House from Ohio, who did a tremendous job in getting this bill, or similar version of this bill, very similar version of this bill, through the House of Representatives with a huge bipartisan vote last year. We came up short in trying to get it through the Senate, but we're back again. And so please welcome Congressman Bob Latta.
I want y'all to have heard what Jeff just said. We got it through the House. It was our friends over in the Senate that came up a little bit short. But I know with Rob's leadership and with Tim's and the co-vice chair, we're going to get it done this time. Again, for all the work that you all did, Jeff and your crew was tremendous. I've had I was the co-chair and been working with you all to get this legislation to where we had it, and you know, again, we had it passed, and unfortunately, just the ways of the Senate kind of took us down from that path. But when you look at everything that's in the piece of legislation this year, it's a great piece of legislation. You know, it should, you know, it's going to pass handily out of the House again. I know under your all leadership it's going to happen, Rob. And it's the work of everybody in this room, too, that got us to that point last session, and we're going to be this session. Before I forget, if I just real quickly thank Madeline in the back. Madeline handles all the issues now in my office, does a tremendous job. But if I fail to neglect to say this, I'm in really trouble, because the one that lets me do this job is my wife, Marcia. She's down for a few days this week for work. And so I thank her for allowing me to do this job, but also allows me to get out and go hunting when I'm home. So I just want to thank you very much. Two pieces, again, that's in the legislation that I have in there that are really important for a lot of folks out there. One is having a $200 fee for small filming crews of less than 5. If you're out on federal lands, if you're a large film crew, they put out a very large bill on you, it doesn't hurt you. But if you're a very small crew and you're struggling out there, anything very large is going to hurt you. So it really says that you can't have more than a $200 fee on those individuals and those groups. The other one is, I'd like to have you say this real fast, the Wildlife Hunting Heritage Conservation Council Advisory Committee. That's a group that advises the Ag Secretary and the Interior Secretary in matters dealing with wildlife issues. And why that's important, we want to make sure that we have men and women on that council that are supporting us, not working against us. And so it sets up the parameters of what that has to do, and when you're advising those two secretaries. But again, I want to thank you all for being here. I want to thank you for all the work you've done, for all the work you will be doing, and also for Jeff and the group for everything you've done. Rob, thanks very much, and good luck this year. Thank you.
We're going to stick with this, Congressman, for sure.
We'll get it done.
I know we will. Going down the list, Congressman Gibbs has had a bill that has been a standalone bill that we are really supportive of, and I'd like to invite him up to explain what we're doing with that and how that's going to fit in as well. Congressman.
Thank you. It's called the Recreational Self-Defense Act, and it's really a simple, common sense bill. But a few years ago, Congress opened up the national parks and forest lands for carrying concealed weapons, or as long as you're abiding to state law. But they omitted, well, I don't know if Congress omitted it, but it was Army Corps of Engineers lands was not included. Army Corps of Engineers lands, they own and control millions of acres, and the Army Corps is pretty adamant to not allow it to happen to be the same as parklands and forest lands. So this is just really a simple piece of legislation that says that the Army Corps of Engineers has to allow your Second Amendment rights on their lands and the lands that they control, and that's it's pretty simple, and it has wide support, of course, the NRA and the Sportsmen, and hopefully we'll get it done. Thanks.
1 million acres of public lands, and for anybody that thinks that that means you can carry your firearm into the dam, The Federal Facilities Act prohibits that. The bill protects all the federal facilities for anything like as if you walked into here. So it's not a wide open. I got asked that when I was sitting in as one of the witnesses about, walking straight in with firearms, and that's not the case. So sometimes I think people ought to read the bill language before they start spouting out the reasons why they don't support the bill. But there again, we're in Washington. So from down on the Mississippi River, we got another problem that we're trying to solve with this. And I'm going to invite Congressman Rick Crawford to come up and explain what we're trying to do just to encourage more people to go out hunting without the fear of getting arrested inadvertently. Thank you, Congressman.
Thank you. Well, let me give you a little bit of background. Naturally occurring practices, normally occurring practices on farms. Now, I come from rice country. In fact, my district in Arkansas, the eastern third of the district, I call it the east coast of Arkansas, the full Mississippi frontage from Missouri to Louisiana. We're known for a couple of things. One, half the U.S. rice crop, and two, some pretty fantastic duck hunting. You've probably heard of Stuttgart, Arkansas if you're a duck hunter. That's in my district. This picture is a pretty good representation. I don't know if it was taken in Arkansas one, but I'm going to say it was. At any rate, naturally occurring phenomenon in Arkansas and other rice-producing areas is weather sometimes sort of allows for, or just sort of nature provides for, what's called a second crop of rice, or ratoon rice. So after they harvest the rice, which is a common habitat for duck populations, after they harvest the rice, a lot of times, weather allows or weather forces a secondary crop. You may or may not harvest it. But what you do is you roll it so that you can flood your fields and create that duck habitat that we enjoy so well down there. Well, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife says that constitutes baiting. And now, obviously it hurts us in rice country. We're not baiting fields. That's just a natural practice, a normal agronomic practice that farmers engage in. But why this has why we're concerned about this in the broader sense is because what are you going to tell folks in southern Arkansas who have a volunteer corn crop? Now, for folks who don't understand agricultural terms, volunteer corn crop is a crop that's not supposed to be there. Maybe you had a soybean crop planted there and corn pops up. Or you had a late germinating corn or something like that, and there it is. And so now is Fish and Wildlife going to come in and tell you in southern Illinois or somewhere else in Kentucky that you're guilty of baiting because this volunteer crop is going on? And so what our bill basically does is say, look, we recognize that farmers aren't perfect, but the other thing is we also need to have some third-party arbiter come in and say this is a natural agricultural practice, and essentially indemnify those farmers from being cited for baiting their fields, which could be upwards of $15,000 fine. So this piece of legislation moved as a standalone. At one point in time, it was added to the SHARE Act. Last year, no problems, no controversy. We think it's a good piece of common sense legislation. Glad that it's attached to the SHARE Act again this time around. And farmers, I like to say farmers are not environmental activists, but they're active environmentalists. And they do these things to preserve, the conservation value on their land. Duck hunting is a big part of that, certainly in my district and other parts of the Mississippi Flyway, the Pacific Flyway, the Atlantic Flyway, and so on. So we want to make sure that we're protecting them, preventing them from being fined exorbitantly or even at all for natural practices. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer. Thanks, appreciate it.
And providing quality habitat and food for waterfowl is a good thing too, because it keeps them coming back year after year. So I'm going to go through the list, and then we will ask if anybody's got any questions, and I know some of the members have to go. One of the other provisions that's in the House bill, which is an important thought when we talk about federal land holdings, and Congressman Dan Newhouse is going to explain about FLIPFA. And that's the only way I can say it, because otherwise the Federal Land Facilities Transaction Act is a mouthful. But we'll just call it FLIPFA. Let you explain what FLIPFA is and why it's part of this. Thank you, Congressman.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I don't know who comes up with these acronyms, it wasn't me. But, thanks for letting me be here as part of this presentation this morning. This will probably be one of the few times that I come to an SCI function and not go home with a firearm that I didn't know I couldn't live without. So, I'm from Central Washington, freshman congressman, so I'm very excited to be part of this effort to increase the ability to access federal lands and protect Second Amendment rights. Thanks for putting on this program this morning. FLIPFA, it's actually, the proper name is Federal Land Transaction Facilitation Act. Yeah. What it actually does, it's a reauthorization of past legislation that had expired, but had proven to be very successful. And over its 10-year life, which I think it expired 5 years ago, actually reduced federal land holdings by 9,000 acres. And what it does, it authorizes the department to sell surplus land for private state use, economic activity, and use those proceeds to purchase additional land, perhaps some of the lands that are encumbered by the checkerboard patterns that we have sometimes. So it's a good common sense way for conservation, utilizing those lands that need to be protected, also to get lands back into the hands of those people that can best put them to economic benefit. But a big part of it is a requirement that the proceeds be used to enhance the hunting, fishing, and shooting recreational activities that are parts of those lands. And I think that that's something that we can't ignore. So it's a two-pronged approach, something that will help conserve lands, makes good economic sense, doesn't use taxpayer funds to acquire additional lands, plus it enhances recreational opportunities, which in my part of the world is hugely important. I've got counties that are over 80% federally owned. And without access to those federal lands, that we then cannot pass on to next generation those things that we think are very important, cultural values that we have, the important ways that we can enjoy those lands. And I want to keep them accessible, not only for me, but for my generations to come. So thanks a lot for letting us be here this morning, and we're looking forward to getting this done. I do have to take exception to the previous speaker. I think farmers are perfect. I've always said that farmers are the original conservationists, and so anything that we can do to enhance the farmers' ability to work with promulgating wildlife and preservation of important species, I think is very important. So there's a lot of things in this legislation that are important: protecting Second Amendment rights, enhancing federal land access. It's just good all the way around. I'm looking forward to having success on this bill. So thank you very much.
As many of us know in this room, that key word of access, it's the #1 reason, poll after poll after poll, that people stop hunting and fishing is they don't have access to the land. So when you think about it, these are federal lands. They belong to all of us. And so this bill goes a long way to trying to create that access. The whiskey and cigar stuff still going on in there. Before I introduce our next speaker from Safari Club International, I just want to invite any of the other members of Congress want to say something about this. I know I testified. I heard your comments in there in the hearing, which I appreciated greatly, in your views and your comments about a young man that got arrested for something that he shouldn't have. And so that's part of it too. The law enforcement really needs to be partners in this thing. Sportsmen and women pay the way for most conservation, including the state game and fish departments. We want to be good stewards of the land. We want to be law-abiding citizens. Let's work together on this. And so, Congressman, I appreciated those comments from before. Before I put my friend from the Senate on the spot here, because this has been a very heavily House-dominated conversation, our co-sponsors here today are the Safari Club International, which have been partners with Congressional Sportsmen Foundation since the day we started. And they've got a brand new, is it Director of Federal Affairs? Thank you. I'm working through all the titles, but Chip Burkhalter is here. He's been on the job for 10 days.
About 9.5.
9.5, okay, so, but Chip is here, SEI has got some provisions in this thing that they're very, very passionately involved with, and so, if you join me in inviting Chip up here to talk about a couple of other provisions in the House have passed, and then I'm saving the best for last here, Chris. So, Chip Burkhalter.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Jeff, and thanks to the CSF staff and Congressional Sportsmen's Caucus for hosting this event. I'd also like to extend a greeting to members of Congress, their staffs, members and supporters of the sportsmen's community. I'm looking forward to working with each of you as we go forward on this. As Jeff said, my name is Chip Burkhalter. I've now been on the job officially about 9.5 days. I bring with me 2 decades of experience in the public and private sectors. I spent 7 years living overseas with the U.S. government, 6 years in sub-Saharan Africa, and a year in Iraq, where I was focused on Operation against Al-Qaeda and ISI, what we now know as ISIL. So it was a challenging and interesting year for sure, but I'm excited to be at SEI and I'm honored to be talking to you today. This is without a doubt an interesting time to be joining SEI. Our nation's hunting heritage is under attack from a variety of groups. It's not just our normal opposition that we've come to know so well. They're well funded and they're well organized. They've used a variety of tactics to go ahead and advance their agenda. They've chosen to discard science in favor of hyperbole and misinformation based on emotion to try and discredit us. They've used state ballot initiatives, federal legislation. They have repeated opposition to comprehensive sportsmen's legislation. And most recently, they've tried to persuade airlines to cease the shipment of legally permitted sport-hunted animals out of Africa. Think about this last point for a minute. This is one I think is becoming more and more important. Anti-hunting groups are trying to interfere with the trade in Congress and American taxpayers' legal possessions. Ending this trade would be detrimental to the species these groups want to save, and it would deprive African communities of the revenue and jobs that hunters create. This is quite simply wrong, and it's something that needs to be stopped. One way that we as a community can stop this onslaught from our opposition is working with you, the members, and your staffs to ensure speedy passage of a comprehensive sportsmen's legislation package that we talked about in various forms this morning. Now is the time for us to come together as a community and act in the best interest of nearly 40 million Americans who hunt and fish, and more importantly, the $90 billion that we contribute to this economy. From the SEI perspective, I think there's probably 3 key elements in the SHARE Act that we have really focused on. First is the Recreational Fishing and Hunting Heritage and Opportunities Act, led by Congressman Beneshen. If you listen to our detractors, this bill is going to open all of our national parks and historical sites to hunting. It's going to trample the 1964 Wilderness Act in a variety of ways, and it's going to weaken the National Environmental Policy Act, and the list can continue. I think we all know that this is really just nonsense. This is common sense legislation that preserves our right to hunt, fish, and shoot on federal lands where such activities are not prohibited. And it also streamlines the efforts of relevant federal agencies. Having spent time in a federal agency, I can assure you that is a very good thing. The best way to show our opposition their efforts are misguided is to demonstrate broad-based bipartisan support. And I think as you touched on, Congressman, that's something that this act, especially in the House, has shown throughout its history. The second thing that we find to be important is the Polar Bear Conservation Fairness Act, led by Congressman Don Young. This bill will allow U.S. hunters to import polar bears that were legally harvested in Canada prior to the bear being listed as threatened in 2008. Revenue from the importation of these bears would be used to support polar bear conservation and research activities. There is no science-based reason that this should not be allowed. Again, broad-based bipartisan support on this would go a long way in putting an end to some of the attacks being faced by our community. Third is the African Elephant Conservation and Legal Ivory Possession Act of 2015, also led by Congressman Young. This bill would help efforts to continue to protect the African elephant. U.S. hunters support anti-poaching efforts through the funds they pay and their presence in the field. For example, in Zimbabwe, where I lived for 2 years, and probably more importantly to this group, took my first antelope, hunter-derived revenue contributes in excess of 60% of the annual budget of the Zimbabwe Parks and Wildlife Management Authority. I think you all realize that that money is critical to the on-the-boots-ground anti-poaching efforts that are going on in Zimbabwe. Our opposition refuses to admit the positive benefits that hunting can play in conservation, such as funding those critical anti-poaching efforts. Instead, they seek to advance their anti-hunting agenda with no basis in science and regardless of the negative impacts on the species as a whole. No one has more appreciation of the beauty and power of the African elephant than someone who has seen them in the field. I can remember clear as day, in Zimbabwe in the bush, being charged and having an elephant stop within 6 feet of me, so I have a keen appreciation for it, I assure you. Poachers are not going to stop if this bill does not get passed, but it is certainly possible that some of these conservation efforts will cease due to a lack of funding. In conclusion, passing a comprehensive sportsman's legislation package is of the utmost importance to SCI, our members, and our community. We implore both the House and the Senate to take action on comprehensive bipartisan legislation to preserve our hunting heritage for future generations. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak with you. Thank you, Jeff, for hosting this, and to members and their staffs. I look forward to working with each of you going forward. Thanks.
He mentioned our good friend Congressman Don Young. He showed up last night with boutonniere, and it was his 82nd birthday yesterday. And kind of curious about the boutonniere. He got married yesterday for the second time in his life after his dear wife for many years passed away. So if you see Congressman Don Young, he's a newlywed today. He's been married for 1 day, so 82. I like the spirit and I like the way, and he promised me, he said the boutonniere, people were asking him if he came out of the closet. He said, no, I just got married today. So that was not a disparaging joke. I got to be very careful about this. All right, so we've heard about all the House passed efforts. 2 Congresses in a row. The House has passed the Comprehensive Sportsmen's Act. And there's an old adage, the Senate is the place where good legislation goes to die. And there's another old adage, it's not the Republicans or the Democrats that are the enemy, it's the Senate that's the enemy. So my good friend, who happens to be the point person on the committee for Energy and Natural Resources in the United States Senate for Lisa Murkowski, Senator Murkowski from Alaska. It's also in the last Bush administration at the Department of Interior, so he knows a thing or two about what we're talking about on these issues. And they came out of the blocks with a bipartisan bill in the Senate, right out of the blocks. I think it's up to 20 co-sponsors?
Yeah,
22 co-sponsors, evenly divided in the United States Senate between Republicans and Democrats. We got a couple of issues there, and so for those of you that don't know Chris, you need to know him, because we got to put a lot of pressure on him, because you can't call the senator, so you call your friend and you just yell at him a lot and say, what's going on here? So without any further great introductions, our friend Chris Kearney from Senate ENR.
Good morning. Thank you, everyone. First, let me tell you that Senator Murkowski very much had wanted to be here. A significant conflict of which only a few arise that would keep her from here. But she does send her regrets. She had a terrific time with the Sportsmen Foundation SCI at the great event out in Las Vegas, where probably many of you are. And she is an avid sportsman and fisherman. If you go into her lobby, one of her offices, you will see on the wall probably the largest fish you've ever seen in your entire life that she in fact herself caught and is very proud of. I thought what I would do is spend a few minutes giving you just the context of kind of how we got started, kind of where we are and where we think that we're going. But I do feel first compelled to explain that I spent 10 years in the House as a staffer, including 7 at the House Resources Committee and 4 at Budget. So I'm not your typical Senate staffer, so keep that in mind as time goes forward.
So no excuses.
Yeah, it's medicine. It's where I am now, right? Senator Murkowski was co-sponsor of the version that got almost to the floor last year with Senator Hagan. Shortly after the election, she had a conversation with the chairman of the Bipartisan Sportsmen's Caucus, Jim Rush. They had a conversation, and it was agreed that she very much wanted to resume the leadership that she had with the language last year, in conjunction and working in partnership and hand in glove with the Sportsmen's Caucus. She is convinced this is 3rd time as the charm. So in fact, shortly after that conversation, she called me and our staff director in December and made it abundantly clear that she wanted a bill out as early as humanly possible. She wanted to get moving as fast as we quickly could, and she has been unrelenting ever since. So along those lines, we started as a base, the Hagan-Murkowski bill from last year. Many of the provisions, and you probably recognize, they also overlap with yours, became the basis for that. We had several discussions with members on both sides of the aisle, as well as a member of the sportsmen's community, and we added 4 provisions. Two went away, and I'm happy to get into the details of it. 2 went away because they got enacted related to duck stamp. We added 4 provisions, notable among them Senator Heinrich's Hunt Act, which deals with developing an inventory of basically in-holdings and the like that keep access potentially restricted under the Forest Service lands. We added an equal justice and judgment fund from the judgment fund provisions, which essentially established a database for information aimed at trying to get a spotlight on the sue and settle matters. And then we also added BOEs and Senator Enzi's provision, BOEs in parks, which essentially was close to being adopted last year, that allows you to have equivalency access across Park Service lands for BOEs on your way to hunting, the same way you may recall a few years back we put together some provisions related to guns. So in the Senate, we introduced S405 with Senator Heinrich and Senator Murkowski as the co-sponsors, as well as the Bipartisan Sportsmen's Caucus. Approximately 14 provisions. Now, in the Senate, we have a dynamic that's different than yours. As you may know, you essentially, under normal circumstances, a parliamentarian determines what the preponderance of the legislation is, and they refer to a single committee, even if there's a substantial contribution by other committees. And that, in fact, was the case with us. And in order for us to both meet the leader's mantra of regular order for legislation, as well as a recognition that roughly 50% of S405 fell into EPW's environmental reports jurisdiction, and about 50% in the ENR committee. We made a determination to take a couple of procedural steps to put S405 on the Senate calendar if we needed to, but in fact what we did was we split the 2 bills, we split 405 apart, and we sent EPW plus a few provisions. That was introduced by Senator Sullivan, and then we introduced the Energy and Natural Resources piece by Senator Murkowski. Both bills have had hearings. We are working towards a markup. I would think, if all goes well this summer, we are continuing to negotiate with the Democrats on the Energy and Natural Resources piece. They only have a couple of provisions that they are really sort of hung up on, so we're having conversations about that. Environment and Public Works, as you probably know, generally tends to be a partisan committee, even in this particular case. But there are some provisions that Environment and Public Works are looking to add, that they're negotiating to some degree with their Democrats. We have a pretty good sense, I think, of what amendments will be offered when we get around to committee, as well as EPW. Reality is that we are also trying to move an energy bill that is pretty comprehensive, you may have heard, and EPW is working to move a highway bill. So there are a number of things on both committee calendars that are sort of clouding the process, but Senator Murkowski continues to pound and push on this, Senator McConnell's staff, and we have been in regular communication. They continue to be supportive and are working with us to figure out floor time once we get the 2 bills through committee, which, as I said, is continuing to actively be worked. We're continuing to grow co-sponsors. We generally are adding them in pairs of some kind, so we're doing 2 at a time or 4 at a time, depending on how it works out. So we have 20 or 22 co-sponsors now. We have 2 or 3, actually I think we have 4 waiting to be added, but frankly, 3 of those are Republicans because we've got a lot of the early, easy Democrats. And the dynamics are a little bit, and the dynamics here will not surprise you. One of the things we will be fighting against already is this year shaping up to be a mirror version politically, I think, of what last year was. The politics of it are that I think the Democrats believe that 2016 is their year to take back the Senate because the mismatch, in their view, there's a mismatch of us defending 24 and them defending 10. So regrettably, there are some elements of the Democratic caucus and leadership that are putting pressure on their members not to cooperate, not to do things bipartisan, and certainly not to produce a bipartisan piece of legislation that they could not pass in the Senate in the previous 2 Congresses. We are mindful of that. Senator Murkowski is mindful of that. I think her relationships across the aisle and her commitment along with the Sportsmen's Caucus Democrats as well I think serves us well in terms of our likelihood of being able to advance the legislation and get over that hurdle. I don't think it's insurmountable, but it has slowed, I think, a little bit of the co-sponsor opportunities. Those we have to work a little bit harder. Some of the issues that the Dems are raising are to some degree specious, and we just need to kind of work through them. So I'm optimistic as well. Senator Murkowski asks about it all the time. She pushes her staff to make sure that there's going to be time to do this. Senator Heinrich, who's also on our committee, on the Democratic side, is very, very engaged, and he has made it clear on the Democratic side at the highest levels, as I understand it, that this is a priority for him as well. And the members of the Democratic caucus in the Senate see it that way as well. So it'll take us a little bit of time to work through some of the issues. We don't have the benefit and the luxury that you guys do here procedurally. But do not mistake, what may seem like a past as prologue necessarily. The dynamics are different this time. We've got, as I said, we've got some of the old school stuff we have to kind of work through. But it's a different dynamic. And, Senator, I will tell you that Leader McConnell, unlike Senator Reid, is not concerned about tough votes for his members or for anyone. He believes that when you legislate, you didn't come here to take it easy. So the bill is not in any way, shape, or form, unlike under Senator Reid, it is not being held up or slowed down on our side because of potential challenging votes, because there'll be plenty. The process is very different over there as far as the amendment process is concerned. People can literally practically write out an amendment on a napkin and file it, and as long as they can get it what's known as pending, you'll get a vote on it. It's got to be germane, but germane is going to be a pretty broad test. So we're optimistic, we're encouraged, we're continuing to work. I can tell you, as a staff lead on this, I spend a good amount of time on it. And as Jeff can tell you, a lot of time on it every week, and I'm talking to folks in the sportsmen's community that have been enormously helpful and influential in getting us to this point, for which we are enormously appreciative. It'll take more work on all of our parts as we go forward. I've seen some of the House provisions. I understand a lot of the House provisions overlap, which is terrific. At a staff level, I'm in regular communications with some of the Resources Committee folks that have some of these, as well as other folks here, and I understand what your dynamic is. So I think we're well positioned this year to get across the finish line. There'll be some bumps and twists along the road, and things won't go as smoothly or as directly as we hope, as any of us would hope, but that's legislative. So we'll get there, and again, thanks to everyone in the room who's been helpful, and you're there from our side if there's any questions that I can answer now. But we want to make the process work and get done, and we're committed to doing that. And so she has made it clear I need to be accessible, which I will be anyway, but just rest assured, we envision this is something we're going to work together with you guys on and get it done.
Chris, what can we do to help within this community?
You stole my thunder, I appreciate that.
It was
the same, it's a yin and yang, so I like that. Every possible connection you have in every office in the Senate, particularly on the Democratic side, anything you can do to keep frankly, pressure on the momentum going, that to get them to co-sponsor, to try to, if they have concerns or objections, to steer them to me or to Heinrich's folks. We don't want this sort of period as the staffs are working through the committee to be, we don't want the momentum to lose. So the more that anybody on the outside or staff-wise can do to help keep the focus and the pressure on, it would be enormously helpful. That's the single biggest thing I think that you can do. And if you hear things are running into roadblocks, get a hold of Jeff or me and we'll work through it.
9 provisions here that are pretty close to meeting each other. I think by most tests, that's a pretty good indication that you're working something together. We've got bipartisan support in the House and the Senate, and so we need everybody's help on this. Bill, any words of wisdom from a former member of the House on how to get things across the finish line on the Senate side? No, okay, you're ducking. You told me you were going to be riding into the sunset here. I didn't think I'd let you off quite that easy, So, all right, ladies and gentlemen, a couple of other announcements. Tonight, Dallas Safari Club is holding a reception at Bullfeathers from 5 to 8. Everyone is welcome to come. They are great partners along with Safari Club International to Congressional Sportsmen Foundation, and very active here in Washington on these same issues. So I think that's it for the staff members here. We're going to do a staff shoot in the beginning of the August recess. Pay attention to when PJ sends the announcement out, because we filled up in a day last year. The shooting range can only take so many people. So thank you. Thanks to Safari Club International for, again, sponsoring this. I think we've got a couple of raffle things, right, Phil? Right, Elizabeth? So if you got a business card, this is the easy one. The Safari Club for co-hosting. Thanks, Chip. Thank you guys very much. So.